In the summer of 1515, in a walled city in the Holy Roman Empire, a woman stepped into the street and began to dance. She didn't stop. Not for food, not for water, not for sleep. Within a week, 34 people had joined her. Within a month, it was hundreds. They danced through blistered feet. They danced through torn muscles. Some, witnesses said, danced until their hearts simply stopped, collapsing in the street while the crowd around them kept moving. The city's own doctors watched it happen, and instead of stopping the dancing, they made it worse. This is the story of the Dancing Plague of Strasbourg, a disaster that modern science is still trying to explain 500 years later. Welcome back to Unsettled Reveries, the channel where we go looking for the moments history tried to forget. Today we're going to 1518, to the free imperial city of Strasbourg, nestled on the banks of the Rhine, a wealthy trading centre known for its cathedral, its guilds, and its orderly civic government. This was a city under pressure. Famine had gutted the countryside the year before. Smallpox and syphilis moved through the population. The poor were poorer than they had been in a generation, and the promise of a good harvest kept slipping further away with every failed crop. Into that pressure cooker walked a woman named Frau Troffea, and what she did next has never been fully explained. Historians have proposed poison. Priests at the time proposed a curse. Doctors proposed too much heat in the blood. By the end of this video, you'll know what actually happened, and why the city's own solution to the problem may have killed more people than it saved. And by the end, you'll understand why some historians consider this one of the strangest, best documented mass illnesses in European history, precisely because the people trying to fix it left behind a paper trail of everything they tried. Let's go back to July of 1518.
It began on a narrow street, sometime in the second week of July. Frau Troffea, that's the only name history gives her, stepped outside her home and started to dance. No music played. No festival was underway. There was no wedding, no feast day, no obvious reason for her to move at all. She simply began, alone, in the middle of the street, and did not stop. An hour passed, then several. Neighbours gathered to watch, unsettled, unsure whether to laugh or to intervene. By nightfall, she was still going, her body soaked through, her feet raw and bleeding through her shoes. The next morning, she was dancing again, and the morning after that. Contemporary accounts, including the physician and astrologer Paracelsus writing decades later, and city chronicles from Strasbourg itself, describe her dancing for somewhere between 4 and 6 days, almost without meaningful rest, her body driven by something no one present could identify. The city magistrates didn't know what to make of it. Strasbourg in 1518 sat at the intersection of medicine and superstition. Illness could be sent by God, summoned by the devil, or caused by an imbalance deep in the body. And often all three explanations were considered at once, sometimes by the very same physician. So the authorities did what educated people of the time believed was reasonable. They sent Frau Troffea to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, the patron saint associated, disturbingly, with a nervous, jerking affliction already nicknamed Saint Vitus's dance by peasants across the region. It didn't help. And within days, Frau Troffea was no longer alone. By the end of that first week, 34 other people in Strasbourg had started dancing exactly as she had, uncontrollably, compulsively, and without any music to explain it, as if something had passed from her body into theirs simply by being watched. By August, the numbers weren't just growing, they were multiplying by the day. Contemporary sources put the count at around 400 dancers at the outbreak's peak. 400 people in a city of roughly 20,000, moving through the streets in a compulsion none of them had chosen and none of them could explain or control.
Witnesses described dancers with eyes rolled back, mouths open, limbs jerking in directions that looked less like dancing and more like the body fighting itself, muscle against muscle, hour after hour. Some screamed for help even as their feet kept moving against their will. Some begged bystanders to hold them down, to tie their arms, to do anything to make it stop. And still, they danced, day after day, through the heat of the Alsatian summer. Physicians of the period were called in, and their diagnosis has survived in the historical record. The dancers, they concluded, were suffering from hot blood, an excess of heat rising through.
In late August, Strasbourg's council took formal action, and their solution was to lean directly into the epidemic rather than contain it. They cleared 2 guild halls and a section of the grain market to create open dancing space for the afflicted. They hired professional musicians, drummers, pipers, horn players, to keep a steady, driving rhythm going from morning until night. They even paid strong men to physically support dancers who could no longer stand on their own, so the dancing could continue without collapse or interruption. The idea, rooted firmly in the hot blood theory, was that the compulsion had to burn itself out completely. Feed the fire, the reasoning went, and it would finally exhaust itself and go dark. It did the opposite. The music and the public spectacle appear to have pulled more people into the compulsion rather than releasing them from it. Some historians studying the event now believe the organised dancing acted less like a release valve and more like a trigger, turning private compulsion into public contagion, in full view of a frightened, deeply superstitious population that had already spent a year bracing for disaster. Contemporary chronicles describe as many as 15 people a day dying from exhaustion at the height of the outbreak. Heart failure, stroke, bodies that simply gave out after days without adequate food, water, or sleep. By September, the strategy had clearly failed, catastrophically and publicly. Strasbourg's council reversed course entirely. The stages came down, the musicians were sent home and paid off, and in a final, almost desperate move, the authorities banned dancing and music altogether across the city, and had the remaining afflicted carried, by force, in carts, to the shrine of St. Vitus in the hills above the town of Severn. There, according to the record, wrapped in red cloth and led through a specific penitential ritual, many of them finally stopped. We don't have Frau Troffea's voice. We don't have the voice of a single one of the hundreds who danced beside her. What we have are numbers, city chronicles, and the horrified second-hand accounts of the people who watched from doorways and windows. But historians who have studied Strasbourg in 1518 have pieced together the world these people were living in, and it helps explain why so many bodies were, in a sense, already primed to break under the right kind of pressure. The year before, by the time the epidemic finally burned out, likely sometime in September of 1518, historians estimate the outbreak had claimed dozens of lives, and some estimates, drawn from different chronicles, run considerably higher. Strasbourg was not entirely new to this kind of event either. Smaller outbreaks of compulsive, involuntary dancing had been recorded across medieval Europe for centuries before, in the Rhineland, in the Netherlands, in parts of France, almost always in places already gripped by hardship, disease, or fear, and almost always fading from the historical record with little explanation. What makes Strasbourg different is the scale of it, and the fact that we have unusually detailed records, because a functioning city government tried to manage the crisis with official policy, spent real money on it, and wrote down exactly what they did and why. It's tempting, from 500 years away, to see the Dancing Plague as a strange medieval curiosity, a story about a superstitious, less rational world that has nothing to do with us. But strip away the centuries, and the shape of the story becomes uncomfortably familiar, a population under sustained compounding stress, a crisis nobody in power fully understood, treated with confident authority anyway, and a response genuinely well-intentioned that made the emergency measurably worse rather than better. Frau Troffea's name survives in the record almost by accident, a single line in a city chronicle describing a woman who stepped into a street in July and could not stop moving. We don't know what happened to her afterward. We don't know if she survived the year or if she ever remembered any of it. What we do know is that for a few weeks in the summer of 1518, in a city built to feel orderly, prosperous and safe, hundreds of people danced because their minds and bodies had nowhere else left to put the weight they were carrying. And nobody, not the doctors, not the priests, not the city council,